Hey everybody, it's Jamie. We have a bonus episode of the Benchwarmers podcast this week. We joined Avi Feingold and Ilana Zakon on their podcast, Bonjour, the sort of flagship current events podcast for the Canadian Jewish News. We talked about all things Olympics, Jews at the Olympics, Israel sports, and what's been going on so far in Tokyo. We'll be back next week for a special event that we are hosting with Stand With Us about the Tokyo Olympics. You can join us for that on Thursday, August 5th at 7:30 p.m. There's information about that on our Twitter page and at the CJN in the Canadian Jewish News newsletter. So please join us for that special event Zoom call.
This is Bonjour, the Jewish geography should absolutely be an Olympic sport edition. I'm Avi Feingold in Montreal, and I'm here with Ilana Zakon in Vancouver. We are your Frozen Chosen. On today's episode, we are talking Olympics, of course, with the hosts of the Benchwarmers podcast, Jamie Hirsch and Gabe Pulver. But before we dive in, let's hear from our sponsor.
Today's episode is brought to you by our sponsor, Atelier Lou Bijouterie in Montreal, Quebec. Atelier Lou specializes in watches and custom design jewelry along with a curated selection of designer jewelry. Visit us online or in person and Eric Goldberg will help make your jewelry dreams come true. Atelier Lou is offering a promo code for all Bonjour High listeners using BON18 at checkout for 10% off your order at atelierlou.com.
It's that time again when people all of a sudden become experts and pundits in sports that would be niche and arcane otherwise. Yes, the Olympics. And here to help us unpack all that delicious Olympic Jewiness are the Benchwarmers themselves, Jamie Hirsch and Gabe Pulver. Welcome to the program.
Thanks for having us.
Lovely to be here. We're immediately talking over each other. You guys might want to get used to that.
We're all Jews here, we understand.
That's okay. Don't worry about it.
It's nice to be with the podcast network Mishpucha. As we were talking before the recording.
Finally, a crossover episode.
So fun.
Yeah.
And what did you want? You said you wanted our opinions on who should be allowed to pray at the Temple Mount. Is that what you said? That's what you're having us on?
No, it's this is 45 minutes on the Green Party.
Okay.
And,
great. We have takes.
Oh yeah, I got Noah Zatzman stories that'll last a year.
So, I know you guys did an episode on fencing as the most Jewish sport of them all, and we'll get to that, I'm sure, later on. Here's my take. I actually think that the Olympics are the least Jewish sport imaginable because of its history with Hellenism and the Greeks and the whole Hanukkah story. And as such, maybe as Jews, we should just, walk away from the Olympics.
That's a bold statement.
I think that's a perfectly good take. I think any anti-Olympics take is like fundamentally correct until it happens. Like the Olympics are these like the worst thing ever. They're terribly corrupt. If anything else was like this, no one would support it. I mean, it's like all the worst things about the UN writ large. The worst things of any sort of international cooperation. But then when it starts, something magical happens. I think it's called cognitive dissonance, where you just put all those things aside and you focus on the sports and what's going on, and it's just amazing. And it's amazing to watch these individuals compete and perform and succeed. And it gets me every time that it's just like these people have trained their whole lives for this. It's such a singular accomplishment, to be on such a stage, and especially for the more freak sports that are out there. It's like nobody watches them. For Kevin Durant or something like that, this isn't the pinnacle of his career. But for someone competing in lightweight sculls, winning a gold is the greatest thing that'll ever happen. So I think the Olympics continue to be a treat.
I'm going to counterpoint you on that, Jamie, if you don't mind.
Let's do it.
Speaking of Avi's, I guess Jews should self-cancel or deselect the Olympics.
Boycott.
I think the early Hellenism actually doesn't even begin to tell the story. The Olympics were brought back in the late 1890s by a guy named Baron Philippe de Coubertin.
Yep.
And there's
a street named after him in Montreal where the Olympic Stadium is.
There you go. You know what?
And it's Pierre de Coubertin, not Philippe.
Pierre, my mistake. Well, given when that was created and whichever Montreal politicians would have decided to do that, this story probably fits well. So, Coubertin's vision of the Olympics was two things. It was supposed to show French global dominance. In all of his writings, he says, I believe the French will return to our, colonial and all ruling ways by winning all of these athletic competitions. And it was supposed to be a politics-free zone, which was sort of lives by that ethos today. But at the time, he meant that they wouldn't be tolerating any minorities, women or Jews, asking to participate.
Oh, wow.
And that's sort of changed over the time. But the Olympics has sort of intentionally been a don't ask, don't tell type situation, and a very exclusionary one for the last 130 years.
When did that change? See, okay, here's my caveat, is that the only reason I'm here today is because they thought it would be funny to have me on the show, because I do not follow sports at all. I know nothing about the Olympics, but I did listen to your episode of Menschwarmers interviewing the writer at Hey Alma, and you know what? It was interesting. There was a few references that went over my head, but that's where I'm coming from. So you're going to have to enlighten me with a lot of the things we're going to talk about. But I'm here for the comic relief, apparently.
That's a great place to start, and we should shout out Emily Barak, who is on our most recent episode of the Menschwarmers podcast. She is doing, I would say, the yeoman's work of figuring out who's Jewish at the Olympics, and I would say we're amateurs at it, and she is a pro. Because for example, there was a swimmer who won a gold medal the other day whose name is Lydia Jacoby. And, there was a question on Jewish Twitter and elsewhere of, Jacoby, that could be, like famed Canadian character actor Lou Jacoby, that maybe she was Jewish. And I would say I put my toe in the water, so to speak, of doing the Google, checking the Instagram, stuff like that. But Emily, in her JTA article about it, was like, here's an obituary I found for this woman's grandfather who had the same name as her father and was involved in this church. Therefore,
I love it.
I'm gonna rule not a Jew. So
yeah,
I think if we were familiar with Emily's work, before we started this podcast, we probably would have been intimidated enough not to do it.
Meaning the podcast in total. The Menschwarmers should not exist.
That's correct.
Because, the Menschwarmers as a concept, right? Let's look at Jews in sports as a podcast is the equivalent in my mind of let's look for the non-Jewish Nobel Prize winners.
Right. Well, just because someone's statistically not that represented doesn't mean they're not important. I mean, we sort of joke that the whole point of the whole raison d'etre for the podcast is two guys sitting around saying, is so and so Jewish, or did you know that so and so is Jewish? And just that is a game that Jews play, in every facet of life, and Jewish
all
sports
the time.
fans, I think, probably do it as much as anybody. Where it's
endlessly fascinating to do so. But Avi, let me level with you for a second. If you're here for this, it's a real dog bites man story, and it is every time. There's a very famous Jewish sports writer named Robert Lipsyte, who once famously said that every athlete takes advantage of their physical gifts, whereas Jewish athletes overcome them. And
I like it.
For that reason, we think it's worth talking about.
Oh, I don't disagree. I think it's great. I think it's a lot of fun. It's just didn't Airplane have a joke about that? The guy wanted some light reading, and they handed him a leaflet, "Great Jews in Sports," and
yeah. It's very funny. My retort to people asking us, or people pointing out there aren't that many great Jewish athletes is to respond, especially if the person's not Jewish, that there aren't that many Jews altogether because of the Holocaust. So that is part of the reason here. I mean, we
it's one way of putting it.
Well,
got real dark real quick.
Right.
Wow, we just hit the Holocaust with 8 minutes in.
What's that?
That's a new record for longevity.
But I do think there's some truth to that, which is just that Jews are so overrepresented in certain fields, like Nobel Prize winners or comedy or music or all kinds of things, that we think that Jews are not represented well in sports. But I think proportionally we probably are in all kinds of ways. I mean, Jews have won MVPs, Cy Young awards, Coach of the Year awards in all the professional sports, and it's just sort of like there's not that many Jews. We've actually had an indelible impact certainly on North American sports more than anything else. And as we're seeing at the Olympics, there are certain sports where Israel, for example, has a very strong program and continues.
Judo, no?
Yeah, exactly. Judo is the best example. Taekwondo as well.
I have a theory about that, and we can talk about talk about Avishal Samberg, who won the first judo taekwondo medal. Won the first taekwondo medal for Israel in this Olympics. But it's not surprising to me at all that your average Israeli is relatively talented at a combat sport.
Fair.
Yeah.
You know, like if you take a look at Israeli judo guy or Sassoon, who he won a medal before. He is likely to medal again unless the event has already happened and he didn't. No, I think he's a heavyweight, so it's coming soon. But like that is a terrifying man. Like he is like I think when you know Quentin Tarantino was writing the character of the Bear Jew, that's like the type of guy he was thinking of. And he's a big fellow, and you're walking down the street in Jerusalem, and you see the guy with the shawarma in one hand, the cigarette in the other, in the military fatigues, and like a machine gun on the side of his back. Like that guy's eventually going to become a judo Olympic medalist.
So you're saying that the trick is that all of us in the diaspora have to join the IDF in order to have the physical dexterity it needs to really compete with the rest of the world. Is that what you're saying?
Well, IDF people are a little terrifying. And it's not surprising that they can do anything. Have you any of you ever seen an Israeli soldier wait in a line?
Yes.
That's shocking.
I'm sure we all
That
have.
is shocking. I think they just.
Oh wait in a line? Wait. I need you to rephrase that.
I mean,
What do you
like
mean by
actually,
wait in a
like
line?
politely wait for something,
Like Canadian
Oh,
style.
Okay, that's not what I thought you were asking.
like Canadian style.
No.
I mean like actually wait
No.
their turn for literally anything, including geopolitics.
Fair enough. Honestly, it's been a while since I've been in Israel, but go on.
It's an interesting question. We should look into whether there is that overlap between, or whether there's that causation between guys going into the IDF or men or women going into the IDF and learning a combat sport after that. I mean, there's no reason why Taekwondo or Judo or Karate now are in the Olympics and other martial arts aren't, except, I don't, without speaking from a point of expertise on this, I assume some sort of IOC corruption that like got the sports in versus others that weren't, is probably to appease somebody to get votes for a bid or something like that.
Wow, you're going full sportocrat here.
Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely.
this is actually an interesting piece of Jewish history, is that a lot of the things that have been historically, said about Jewish people really are true about the IOC. Like, I think, you look at the shadowy cabal that runs the world and exchanges hands money, is simultaneously fighting for unchecked capitalism, yet socialism for the rich. Like, that's just the IOC. Yeah. They're as corrupt as everyone has said we are, but they're real.
My thing about the IOC this Olympics and showing how they're definitively anti-Semitic is that they scheduled the Israeli baseball team to play on Shabbos, assuming that like Sandy Koufax style, every player was just going to walk off the field and they would have to lose by default.
Can I ask my first non-sports savvy question?
Please.
I don't know what the IOC is.
Oh,
Please
so the
explain.
IOC is the International Olympic Committee, and it's just sort of like sportocrats they're called. A bunch of like Middle European and other rich country delegates who sort of decide what's in the Olympic sports, who hosts the Olympics, things like that, including former McGill, what was he, Chancellor Gabe? Dick Pound?
Chancellor.
Yeah.
Dick
Pound.
Pound.
Who also founded WADA or the World Anti-Doping Association. And they're just like, it's like the people in the Capitol in the Hunger Games. They're like those folks.
That reference I understand.
There you
Thank
go.
you.
So the IOC somehow is able to be both a for-profit but tax exempt. There are very few organizations on earth that have pulled this off, but they're one of them.
Which would make them ripe for being a Jewish organization to manage that type of thing. But
Exactly.
they are not.
They're not.
But they're not. I'm pretty sure, they were pretty restricted to Jews up until fairly recently, if I was to guess.
Right. Restricted to Jews or against Jews?
Against. Sorry. Yes.
So all this to say, I think it supports my original point, which is that you have to accept the Olympics as this like fundamentally flawed and like terrible thing that has no defense except for the individual competitors. And it's amazing to be able to watch them and see them do what they do. So, the Israel baseball team is another big story and something that we've been following literally for years now. It was, 2 years ago now, I think in August 2019, that Israel won this Europe/Africa qualifying tournament in order to make the Olympics against, baseball powerhouses like Germany and Italy. Actually, they had to beat the Netherlands, who's surprisingly actually a baseball powerhouse because people in the Dutch Antilles play a lot of baseball, people from Curacao and Aruba. But the thing is, they won this tournament out of nowhere. They qualified for one of 6 Olympic spots, sorry, really 5 plus Japan as the host country gets to play. And, it's just a team of pretty much American Jews. There's a handful of Israeli guys on the team, notably Shlomo Lipitz, who's in his 40s now, but has been on the team for years and years. And it's made up, former MLB players, minor league players, guys who are going to get drafted or go to college. And I think it's just an amazing thing to witness and see. It's just a team full of Jews. And as much as we enjoy sports, if we're lucky, we get to have a Jewish player on our team, or 2 Jewish players on a team, or something like that. And I think most Jews take real pride when their teams have that. And this is just a team full of Jews. And nominally the Israeli team, or more than nominally, they're all Israeli citizens now. They are representing Israel, but they're also Americans who are, living in America and will continue to live in America. And as much as they're developing and supporting the game in Israel, they are, they are a Jewish baseball team, I think, more than anything else.
Shlomo Lipitz is actually a great story because he has a day job. He is the artist booker for a music venue in New York City, like a very famous one. And he, he'll call up, I don't know, let's think of some mid-tier Jewish, Jacob Dylan. He'll call up Jacob Dylan and be like, hey, we got a gig for you if you want it at the City Winery in New York City. Would you like to come play? And then he'll hang up the phone and then put on his jersey and then go close a game in Brooklyn for Team Israel.
It's interesting you bring up this confluence of Israel and Jewish, right? Because we see this happen a lot. And most notably, for example, this week, there was a former Iranian wrestler who defected to Mongolia so that he can play there under their team, and then he won a medal, and he dedicated his medal to Israel because of an incident that had happened in the previous Olympics, and how Iranians were not allowed to play against Israelis, and that happens all the time. And so people clearly at this point play for whichever country they manage to figure something out with or for or however. But the Jews gravitate towards Israel, right? And so you have this Israeli team, which is pretty much all Jews. Are there non-Jews on the Israeli team?
No, there aren't.
Not on the baseball team.
Not on the baseball team.
And then, I mean, in just the Israeli
yes, there are non-Jews on the Israeli Olympic team.
But primarily it's Jews. And then you have the Jews scattered elsewhere, right, throughout wherever this is. And so it's like, you were talking about the bringing in the eliminating of politics and countries versus, people, and Russia now is this year, they're not really there, but they are there. And everybody knows that that's the Russian team, even though they're not called the Russian team. It's a little strange to think about that especially in the context of the Jews in the Olympics versus Team Israel, so to speak.
Right.
So it's interesting you bring that up. There's really only 5 countries that ever send Jews to the Olympics. Mostly because there are 5 countries that allow Jews to live there. But, when we look at all of the Jewish athletes all over the world that we've talked about, that Emily has talked about in her work, you've got Canada and the US probably being the primary drivers of Jews in the Olympics. The UK and Australia as well, countries where Jews are full-fledged members of society. And Russia and Israel. And that's really about it. I don't think there are that many Dutch or Chinese or German Jews that are still, that are actually making the Olympics. It's all from countries that have really strong Jewish communities. So I think as a Jewish sports fan, if you're looking to default cheer for as many Jews as you possibly can, Israel's the easiest one to go to instead of just saying, oh, here's one Russian gymnast I like. You can say that. We're doing it. I'm happy to talk about her. But Israel is a pretty safe bet if you're looking to figure out who the Jewish ones are.
Yeah, I also think it's a pretty the issue of politics is a tricky one. The idea of apolitical sports has always been a fantasy. There's something political to all these things. There always has been. The Olympics have been political since their inception. But I guess for, let's say, North American Jews who want to support Israel, but may not agree with every single thing that Israel does in other contexts, it's nice to be able to just support Israeli athletes. I feel like that's a pretty anodyne way of supporting Israel, or being proud of the fact that there's a Jewish state and being proud of the fact that there's these Jewish athletes representing Israel who are, competing at a high level.
So in terms of you're saying it's pretty apolitical. There's not been one incident this year at all between any clash between countries in that way.
No, the opposite. I think it's incredibly political. I mean, we've seen twice now that there's been a Israeli judo competitor who has twice had opponents refuse to face him, and that's because he's Israeli, because he's Jewish, however you want to play it, however you want to call that. There's a reason they're not fighting him.
I didn't know Ben or Jerry were playing judo.
Let's leave ice cream out of this episode.
Yeah, so just to put some names to this, so Tohar Butbul is the judoka. That's a judo competitor who has now faced an Algerian and Sudanese competitor who just pulled out of the entire Olympics rather than fight him. I guess you could say because their countries don't recognize Israel, because they don't have normalized ties, or whatever, however you want to interpret it. And this isn't the first time it's happened. It happens basically at every Olympics. It happens often at international competitions. If Israel is even allowed to participate, because obviously, if it's, at least until recently, if there have been competitions that have been held in certain Muslim countries that don't recognize Israel, then they haven't even necessarily been allowed to compete. But this happens every time. So this guy's made it through to the round of 16 now, I think. The judoka Tohar has made it through the round of 16.
I think he has lost to a Canadian, as a matter of fact.
And now he's lost to a Canadian. So maybe he didn't get the benefit of having some warm-up matches against these lesser opponents. But, there's always politics in this. It hasn't really come up with the Israel baseball team this time, but last time at the World Baseball Classic, there were, I can't remember where the reporter was from, but either from Mexico or another Spanish-speaking country, but sort of decried the Israeli teams as just like the American B team, because it was all American Jews who comprised the team. And it's like, on the one hand, like that is true. Like these guys, aside from Ian Kinsler on the Israeli team this year, none of these guys could have competed for the U.S. at an international level, at the highest level. Like Ian Kinsler was an all-star multiple times, and obviously is an American. And some of the best Jews in the world are playing in Major League Baseball and can't play. But on the other hand, it is sort of this continued charge of dual loyalties for these people, and there's a political component to it. There's always going to be a political component to these things, and that just I guess that's just the nature of the beast. I mean, there's a political component to Eurovision when Israel competes, right?
Totally. So that's interesting to me. It feels like it's almost, the Olympics is a metaphor for like many, many other things. Even talking about Jews, it's like Jews in sports. You were saying, if it's much easier to just root for Israel because there's going to be majority Jews, and then we're all scattered around. Like that's a pretty, good metaphor for just diaspora in general. But I'm just curious, like as someone who has no interest in sports for the most part, like what is it that attracts you to watching these big games? Because so many people who don't normally watch sports games do watch the Olympics. So is it more about like the people and like rooting for your people, or kind of the behind the scenes, like the stuff we're talking about with politics? And I was talking to someone yesterday who was explaining how there's all this stuff going on this year where like a gymnast came forward about like an assault, and then someone else came and talked about like mental health, and there's all that kind of stuff going on. Like, do people like it for like the whole package, or is it really just like another sports thing and they're more interested in the competition, do you think?
I have a theory about this, and maybe it's a bit of a crackpot theory, but the Olympics, compared to I think a lot of the sports we have from a journalistic perspective, has a ton of downtime. It runs basically 24 hours a day, and there's some breaks between competition. And, you've got 50 athletes competing for 3 medals. So it allows journalists, producers, and writers to take that time to really bring like a fulsome whole broadcast experience that has a lot of storytelling in it that you don't often see in other sports. So you're probably going to learn a lot more about some random Olympian's personal life that they'll start from the very beginning and say, oh, they've got a brother who has so-and-so condition, and they're involved with this charity, and then they might win a bronze medal, but even if they come in fourth, it's an enormous moral victory, which is a lot more storytelling opportunity than you're getting on the broadcast with, just because we were, the Habs went very far in the playoffs, to like learn about Josh Anderson's dad.
Right. And does it feel like they're pushing for, honestly, what just came into my head was like American Idol, how like they show all the backstory and then you're trying to root, like, are they trying to dramatize it, or is it like
I think completely they're
style?
trying to dramatize it.
Yeah, the Olympics are a great TV show.
And these people have lives; they have stories, as opposed to Kyrie Irving, whose life is basketball.
Yes,
right.
That's true.
As you were saying, if you're doing canoe slalom, which okay, sure, that's your thing. You have to have a life outside of that. And so when you're featured in the Olympics, it's going to be like, okay, great. Who is this person?
Oh, absolutely. You'd be shocked at the number of Olympians that still have day jobs, especially the ones that are in sports that are so specialized. You've got a hammer thrower or a weightlifter who, happens to be really freaking good at the gym when they go to and from their job at a bank. It's sort of actually like the CFL in that way. I don't know if you guys ever talk or watch the CFL, but they tend to do a lot of storytelling in the same way. Mostly because I think a lot of the broadcasting and a lot of the storytelling, and this actually probably fits into a lot of the reasons we like cheering for Jews, is like this. It's a little closer than Major League Baseball or the NHL is to this could be you. Or this could be someone because they're a regular person that happens to be really amazing at this one really specialized thing. Like, a great big story was that Iranian nurse who, was a combat zone nurse that has been fighting with the Revolutionary Guard in a bunch of various places. Depending on how much you believe the Iranian officials' account, he's a nurse in war zones who happens to be a really amazing sniper. Maybe he's only a nurse, but it's a really cool story if he is. So that's why they're telling it all over the world.
Right. I mean, that sounds much more interesting to me than watching the sports themselves. I don't know. Maybe I could get into it that way. But it just makes me...
I think a lot of people do.
Well, there you go. It just makes me think a bit about my own industry and the entertainment industry. And, you would be so shocked to know how many people that you think are so famous that are struggling in between work. So it's a similar thing of, that pressure that you feel to, when the whole world is watching you, I would imagine as an athlete, as it would be to be like a famous actor.
Yeah.
I've heard Ryan Reynolds won't eat at a restaurant. Only makes his own dinners.
There you go. They have to keep yourself.
That was a joke.
I rolled with it.
You see, and I'm about to intellectualize sport, which is probably the most Jewish thing one can do. And to me, the only difference between, filmed entertainment, for lack of a better term, or written entertainment or anything like that, and sport is that sport is entertainment for which we do not know the ending, right? Nobody knows the ending, right? And so the possibility for a dramatic, story to unfold as it's happening is what is the allure of sports for certain people, and other people would prefer to know that somebody else, spent hours and years of their life perfecting this piece of art for me because I want that ending to be perfect and I want this to happen, and something is always going to happen, but then somebody always will have known, or that has been quote unquote literally scripted. Whereas with sport is unscripted, right? We can have the Israel baseball team win a gold medal, and they'll make a Cool Running style movie out of it, and it'll be fun, but we won't know until we know.
It's true. I mean, there's actually, if you go back into the archives of our podcast, they made a documentary about Team Israel baseball's Cinderella run before, which is really, really good.
Yes,
but
I look forward. I look forward to the dramatized story of Team Israel's baseball team at the Olympics.
Instead of the Jamaican accents, you'll have the Israeli accents.
Yes,
and I look forward to
the entirely
on the
Gentile
bat
cast.
instead of pine tar.
Exactly. No, I think instead of John Candy, you would have Adam Sandler doing Zohan playing the coach.
Absolutely, yes. That's the hummus reference. Like on the pine instead of pine tar, you'll have
exactly doing the bat with hummus. It's actually funny you say that. I'm by total coincidence wearing a T-shirt that is of Lance Armstrong, who is perhaps like the biggest story arc, I think, probably in our lifetime in sports. He went from being, somebody nobody had heard of to the most famous athlete in the world who participated in a sport that nobody watches.
The first man to bicycle on the moon.
Yeah, the first guy to bike on the moon. Exactly. And now that it turns out that Buzz Aldrin did steroids or something or other, but he's gone through the arc of like the total, obscurity. He won an Olympic medal. He won all those awards or won all those tours, had cancer, was a survivor. And then it was all sort of not taken away. It was all sort of revealed to be, at least to some degree, a lie. That's your whole story. The cycling is like totally secondary to all of that.
Right. Yeah.
That he was actually really good at the biking. That's like way less interesting.
Yeah, it's true. And I would say the Olympics especially have a narrative for most people. I think it's unfortunately a very nationalistic one, but you can root for the people from your country. You can root for the people you share some similarities with in one way or another. And you can root against the evil Russians or whatever other country you decide is evil this time around. And
the evil Russian Olympic Committee,
yes,
I believe they are this time
Russian
around.
Olympic Committee, which itself is such a funny thing. But at the same time, it's a good example of this where it's like, Russia has been sanctioned for these terrible, terrible doping schemes that they've run in a really organized fashion. And it's like, well, we should ban them from the Olympics. But I think people's feeling is, well, but the individual athletes who are around now had nothing to do with that. They need to perform. They need to have their chance. I think it really is the greatest unscripted television there is, because most of it's individual. Like most of it's just these individuals striving and trying to achieve. And as Avi said, we don't know the ending, and we don't know how it's going to go along the way. We have some familiar sports narratives, but at the end of the day, anyone can win. Anything can happen. There was a Tunisian swimmer who won a gold medal the other day that came out of nowhere. He was starting in 8th place going into the finals from a country that, doesn't have a swimming program.
Do they have a pool?
Exactly.
Do they have a swimming pool?
A few, but it's like Olympic-sized swimming pools. I think they might just have one, and it's just like that can happen every year. At the Olympics that happens. A Filipino woman won the country's first gold medal. Philippines is a country with more than 100 million people living in it. It's competed at every Olympics for the last 100 years. And they never won a gold medal. Similarly, a woman from Bermuda just won the triathlon the other day. Bermuda's got less than 100,000 people. They'd never won a gold medal, and they just won their first one. So, this is the kind of, I'm sure there'll be streets or whatever they have in Bermuda, golf courses and pyramid-shaped
resorts,
roofs named after this woman. But, it's just it's an amazing, it's a microcosm for human life. It's all that they sell to us. And unfortunately it's all true. They sell it so well and they package it so well. And it's fascinating for anyone. Even the sports are almost secondary.
So as we wrap up, maybe we can circle back to that thing that we started at the beginning with the idea of fencing as an incredibly Jewish sport. Can you give us the quick summary of that? And have Jews ever won medals in fencing? And what are our chances this go round?
So there's an extremely famous story. There's been a few of them, but
please do not make any jokes about fencing being Jewish because of circumcising flies or anything like that.
Of course, that's an old one. That's an old one. I think it's mostly Jewish because it's sort of a back and forth, and then it ends with a lot of yelling.
Yeah.
But probably the most famous fencing story and the most famous Jewish Olympian story is of Helen Meyer, who unfortunately was, well, not sort of unfortunately. It's an unfortunate story. We'll go there. Anyway, she was the best fencer in Germany throughout the 1930s, and she was Jewish, and she was not particularly shy about being Jewish. And this presented Adolf Hitler with one of his famous dilemmas, where there was a Jewish athlete who was likely to win a gold medal. He wanted to show German supremacy. She was blonde-haired, blue-eyed, but of Jewish ancestry and proudly Jewish. She goes at the 36 Olympics and wins the gold medal in fencing. She crushed the competition, everything's expected, and to the horror of Jews all over the world that knew what was going on top of the podium, she turned and gave Hitler the whole Sig Heil thing. Immediately after, her family was killed in the Holocaust, and she moved to the United States and died alone. After winning the gold medal, there's a lot of debate over what happened with the story, and I think she sort of leaned into her family was threatened narrative, or else she wouldn't do it. But that's a very dramatic Jewish compromise story, at least about that time in Germany and Jewish fencing. But on a lighter note, fencing came to America from a bunch of Jewish anti-Bolsheviks that came over in the 1800s. From Russia and, were trained in fencing, so they opened fencing schools in America. You can listen to that whole story on our podcast episode about the history of Jewish fencing.
Yeah, and Avi, just to answer your question, there have been a number of Jews who have won gold medals in fencing, probably more than any other sport. Really, it was pre-war that Jews just dominated fencing throughout Hungary, France, Germany, Belgium. One person in particular to highlight from that crowd is Attila Petschauer, who is a Budapest Jew, who won gold medals both in 28 and 32 in the team saber. He was the inspiration for Ralph Fiennes' character in the movie Sunshine, a 1999.
I was worried you were going to say in Schindler's List.
Oof, yeah. Ralph Fiennes goes from playing maybe like the worst filmed portrayal of a Nazi in terms of his like barbarity or barbarism in Schindler's List to just playing like an assimilated generations of assimilated Jews in the 99 film Sunshine. So one of the characters he plays in that movie is based on, at least in part, Attila Petschauer as a sort of Jewish fencer, assimilated European guy. And Attila Petschauer died in the Holocaust in 43, in sort of like a whole generations of Jewish fencers who perished in the Holocaust or lost the best years of competition because of the rise of the Nazi Party and domination of Eastern Europe.
You should know that,
yes,
Alana, you are moving away from one of the most glorious Jewfros in Canadian Jewish sport history in Ellie Schenkel, and the Vancouver.
It was remarkable.
Yeah. It's amazing he can get it under the fencing helmet.
I keep thinking that it's like in what's his name in football that has the hair, the long hair coming out of the back.
Troy Polamalu.
Troy, yeah, exactly. That it would like have some sort of effect like that in fencing, but the fencing helmet. But apparently he tucks it
Definitely
in.
similar look. But I guess I would say like I don't know that there's so many people doing it in Canada aside from Ellie out in Richmond. But Jews, get into fencing. It's our heritage.
So I took a semester of fencing, and I think the cost, right, is so prohibitive in terms of buying the equipment that you have to do to not die, right?
Are they sharp? Like, are they the fencers? Like, actually?
No, but they are
not
not sharp. They're not sharp. They're actually because they the way that the scoring system works is that they're pressure sensitive at the tip. So that if you move it back a little bit, that's when the buzzing happens and stuff like that. But if you actually, even with a blunt tip, you can really, if they weren't wearing those Kevlar outfits, you can go right through somebody no matter how blunt, because they are pushing forward with such force. Yeah, Jews and blades. This is what.
You made the circumcising fly joke, but I wonder if there's ever been a fencer/moil just because they really liked slicing.
There you go. Because otherwise, like, there are no other Jewish sports, right? Right.
We've actually talked about
if there was an Olympic sport in like long distance wandering, right?
I think chess
the 40-year marathon.
Chess is depending on your opinion a sport or not, but Jews have definitely dominated chess for generations. I mean, we're not the only people to be successful in it, but there have been some real Jewish chess grandmasters. Besides that,
Garry Kasparov is an Azerbaijani Jew.
Yeah, or at least
of which there are not very many of.
Practicing. Aside from that, yeah, I agree. I mean, judo is probably one that's big. I don't know that there's other ones necessarily. I mean, but these things are cyclical.
Well, but judo's not a particularly Jewish thing. That's what I'm trying to say. That there's very little that is particularly Jewish. In terms of sport, thinking about.
I don't mean to get all Richard Florida on you guys, but if you go back into urbanism of the 21st century, you see a lot of inner city Jews that really, popularized boxing and basketball, which were the two sports that were really most popular in inner cities.
Early 20th
century. Yes, I'm sorry. Early 21st century, I think the most popular Jewish sport was probably being Drake. But in the early 20th century, you see a lot of Jewish people participating in boxing and in basketball. There's a great story about boxing world champion Barney Ross, which I think is the most Jewish sports story ever, is that he was ashamed to tell his mom that he was a boxer for a living because she wouldn't approve. And then she found out when he became champion of the world.
Yeah. And Avi, I think that just ties into what I was going to say about, these things tend to be cyclical. There was a time when Jews and the Irish were the best boxers in the world. And physically, I don't think either of us are dominating from a genetic standpoint or anything like that. And,
it was all the kugel.
Yeah, exactly. So sometimes these things are like environmental. Like there's Kenyan runners from certain parts of Kenya who are just head and shoulders above anybody else in the world. But for the most part, it's just sort of socialized in terms of who's doing it, what sorts of people are doing these things. Like I don't think the Dutch are preternaturally good at speed skating, but they have a real program for it and a real yen for it, so they do it. So I think we'll see the same things from time to time, and something like fencing can come back up. If it's something that's takes a certain amount of effort to get into, then the people who are doing it will be involved in it through certain clubs. And if there's enough clubs that are Jewish, if there's people getting into it, you can just have a resurgence among a certain group that does something.
Well, I think you guys have hit on something, and that's really the theory behind this round of funding and promotion for Israel baseball, is that somebody in Israel has decided that they want to get kids into baseball. Therefore, they are now trying to have an Israeli baseball team.
A lot of that is Jeff Ader in Chicago, who's a friend of mine and has done a lot of funding for that. He loves baseball, loves Israel, and he decided that this is a way to push things forward.
Oh, absolutely, and I think it's ripe for the picking because first of all, baseball does have a history of just sort of colonizing certain countries, for lack of a better word. I mean, it's not like Japan was playing baseball more than 60, 70, or maybe 80 years ago or so.
Cuba as well.
They're, among the best countries in the world. So Japan, Korea, Taiwan have all sort of glommed onto baseball. And for Israel, where soccer is naturally a popular sport like it is in most of the world, and basketball is probably the second most popular sport, there isn't necessarily another one that's competing for everyone's attention in terms of a team sport. And baseball is obviously the best sport of all of them. So there's no reason why we can't see it thrive in Israel as well. It's got the climate for it. You can play it 12 seasons a year. 12 months a year.
That's Israel. Well,
I think in Israel it's 13 or maybe 14 months a year, depending on the year.
That's right.
Jamie, Gabe, thank you so much. This has been great. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you for helping us see through the idea of Jews in the Olympics, the idea of Jews in sports in general. And I hope that all our listeners should catch you guys on your own Menschwarmers podcast on the CGN Podcast Network. And so thanks again for being here. And we'll catch you hopefully soon when there's other Jewish stories about, sports to catch.
It's been a true pleasure.
The sports.
I'm happy to come back anytime Alex Bregman stars in a movie with Alana. We'd love to hear all of the stories from you.
Thank you for listening to Bonjour Chai for Thursday, July 29th. Our producer is Michael Freeman. Technical production is by Andre Goulet. Our music is by So-Called. We are a project of the Jewish Living Lab and are distributed by the CJN Podcast Network. Subscribe on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave a comment and a rating on the platform of your choice and let us know what you think about our discussions on the CJN Lounge on Facebook. I'm Avi Feingold.
And I'm Ilana Zakon.